The history of the Howard Stern Show is quite the interesting topic, or at least I think so. Sure, the program has become a husk of its former self. It used to be better, the golden age is long over, but it's fun to remember the nice parts. Back in the day, a big draw for the show was the Wack Pack, a collection of unusual people, grouped together by their disabilities or eccentric traits, all fans of the show in some shape or form. Simply put, it was a freak show that you could tune into in the morning for some guaranteed laughs. There are plenty of people to pick from, many of which I have already covered on this channel, such as Beetlejuice, Crackhead Bob, Elegant Elliot Offen, and Eric the Actor. But I've been holding off on talking about the grandfather of the Wack Pack for a while because I really didn't know where to begin. One man, known lovingly as Fred the Elephant Boy, captured the hearts of millions of radio listeners with his unusual speech impediment, sexual promiscuity, unconventional appearance, and willingness to please the show's fans. In this video, we'll be covering as much as we can regarding Fred's story and his involvement with the show, and the repercussions for his decisions that played out for all to witness. Fred Schreiber was born in 1958 with a crippling speech impediment that left him sounding funny when compared to other people. His voice was also weak-sounding, causing people to assume that he was tongue-tied. Additionally, he had a bad stutter, but that was fortunately corrected in his youth. Unlike other members of the Wack Pack, there's actually very limited knowledge of Fred's background. It's safe to assume that his childhood was turbulent given his afflictions and how unkind children have a tendency to be.
Also, friends who doesn't want nothing to be on this, so friends who like me just for him, if they never come on the show, if I never mess with their name, years from now, when you move to come some videotape.
On November 28, 1988, Fred called into the world-famous Howard Stern Show because what could possibly go wrong by calling the world's most popular shock jock with that little verbal ailment of his? A friend of Fred had wrote to the show prior to this to inform Howard that he had a good friend that was unable to get women. Considering how he sounded and how commanding he was during the forthcoming conversation, I simply cannot fathom why women weren't just throwing themselves at him. I mean, if I was a lady, I would. God, that'd be such an awful image.
You're on the air.
Yeah, no, I just shut on my radio.
All right. What is that, an Italian accent, Gary?
No.
I smell ratings gold with you, Fred.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
See?
I love you, Howard.
Hey, I love you too, man. This guy's perfect. Now, what is it, some kind of speech defect you got?
Yes, ever since I was born.
Howard was initially unsure if he could get a woman to touch Fred's private area, but it'd be hard just to get a genuine date, period. If he wasn't meeting possible romantic partners at his job, which at the time was for the FDA, and he wasn't finding compatible candidates for love in his personal time, then maybe he might have actually been doomed from the start. Fred claimed that women would often turn him down at bars and social events because of his difficulties with speaking, as they believed that he was mentally challenged or something similar, when in actuality he had no real serious learning deficit. Fred had actually only been on 2 dates when he was in his early teen years, around 13 or 14, but that ultimately never went anywhere. It's easy to understand why he was so discouraged from pursuing the fairer sex.
So what happens, like you go to bars and stuff, and women like look at you and go, hey, not a bad looking guy.
They talk with me, but
Then they think you're retarded, right?
Right.
They think you're retarded.
Yeah, one moment.
But you're not retarded. Hello?
Yeah.
The girls think you're retarded.
Some of them, yeah.
But you're not.
No.
Have you ever got...
got... It's just a space bucket, but everything else is normal.
Uh-huh.
Are you hard of hearing?
No.
Howard inquired about what Fred did at his job. When Fred replied, he revealed that he worked in shipping and handling specifically. Howard mostly ignored this, fascinated by the caller's unique cadence. Howard almost instantly made the comparison of Fred's voice to that of the Elephant Man, a movie that was released 8 years prior and was based on a true story of a man who lived with Proteus syndrome. This comparison is how Fred got his nickname, Elephant Boy, but that should have been obvious.
What kind of job? What do you do for them?
Well, I'm a shipping and receiving.
You do sound like Elephant Man a little bit. Yeah, you do.
Okay.
I am a shipping and receiving.
Robin Quivers, Howard's eclectic co-host, compared Fred to the likes of Sloth from the Goonies, which was not even a remotely fair comparison considering he didn't sound like that, and she had no idea what Fred even looked like. Newsflash, his appearance isn't even remotely comparable either.
You know what
Yeah.
it reminds me of? Have you seen that movie? I mean, just by your voice, sir, I don't know what you look like.
You can imagine.
Did you see, was it Goonies?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Robin, would you take it easy on the guy? It's one thing if a man says it, but when a woman says it, it's awfully emasculating.
Because it always hurts worse to be talked down to by a woman, Fred was a little dejected by this because he wasn't disfigured. All things considered, they were being pretty unfair to him. Howard eventually steered the conversation back to the topic at hand, being Fred's interactions with the honeys, or rather his lack thereof. Stern wanted to know what Fred was into and if he pulled his pud a fair bit, which Elephant Boy denied as he claimed that he didn't think about that kind of stuff anymore. Sure. If you're a man, you know as well as I do that he's full of crap. If you aren't getting any, you're cranking that hog until it's as red as a beet.
So what are you into, like heavy masturbation?
I just think about it anymore.
Oh, dear.
You stop thinking about sex.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, don't worry, we'll get you something.
Anyway, when Stern said that he'd find someone for Fred, Robin interjected that there was once a girl named Celeste who walked with a limp that would be more than willing to bump uglies with the tongue-tied collar. In fact, she was gonna bang another loser who had been on the show before, but the poor guy just couldn't get it up. This was Fred's chance to get up in some guts. Unfortunately, Fred had a stipulation. He was picky about her age, as she was just a bit older than him. I mean, if you haven't been able to get anything at the age of 30, can you really justify being that picky? Part of his problem might have been that he lived with his mother in Queens. These days, women don't seem to care as much about the status of men's residence as they did in the 80s. Any gross schmuck can get laid if they try hard enough. His mother always assumed that eventually the right woman would fall into Elephant Boy's lap, as the world has a unique way of sorting itself out. Robin asked Fred if he had any brothers or sisters, to which Fred replied that he had one brother who was a year older than him. This brother also wasn't afflicted by the same kind of issue that Elephant Boy lived with, which likely caused some tension as his brother was able to live a normal life and get women while Fred had to sit on the sidelines and patiently wait for someone to show him some affection.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have only one brother, a year older than me.
Does he have the same speech thing?
No, not really.
You must hate him.
He's got girls.
You're probably saying to yourself all the time,
Stern was dead set on getting someone to sleep with Elephant Boy to end his 30-year dry spell. He wanted Elephant Boy to show up in a few days, on a sunny Friday, to participate in a dial-a-date for the show's many listeners. Who knows? Maybe he'd get a crumb of coochie, or perhaps something more. I mean, even a kiss would be better than nothing. And hitting the ripe age of 30 without making contact with someone's lips using your own is kinda sad. Howard and Robin were game for the game as long as Elephant Boy would be able to perform. It'd be a shame if he finally got the chance to be with a woman and he just couldn't stiffen up, you know? I should probably apologize for making you think about him doing the nasty, but I'm not gonna. Elephant Boy kept his promise and made his first in-person appearance to the studio on December 2nd, 1988. Howard and Robin were likely expecting some kind of grotesque husk of a human to shamble its way into their recording room, but to their surprise, Fred looked remarkably average. Considering what they were expecting and given his trouble with women, it's a miracle that he was just normal looking. Your typical everyday working man. More or less anyway. Howard continuously reiterated that Fred was not a bad-looking guy. It just had to be his voice that was causing him so much trouble. Hell, Robin even said he was cute, which differs from her initial opinions from before, especially considering she was making fun of him just a few days prior. Must have been those muscles he was packed with. She probably felt intimidated in a good way. Elephant Boy's impediment was put to the test. Howard made noises that he wanted Fred to repeat, which only served to humiliate him, but he was a good sport about it.
You're kidding. I mean, you can't think, like, you say like this. Ow.
Oh.
Ow. Ow. Ow.
And what can he use that sound for?
Say now, cow.
Oh.
Cow.
Oh,
See, that was
gee.
perfect.
There you go. Say a,
A,
bay.
Bay.
See? Robin, imagine him if he hadn't taken speech therapy. Then we'd really have a great show.
The duo continued to interview Fred regarding his voice. Fred hammered down that he had been the way he was since the very beginning, blaming his birth for what happened. He's technically not wrong, as births are arguably the primary starting point for most birth defects, but you know. Anyway, Howard alleged that women were already calling in for Fred, ready to hook up with him to, well, hook up. However, despite this, the phone lines were actually pretty slim, but the game had just yet to properly begin. Howard had also lined up two women, named Angel and Bim, who were down to knock some boots with a tongue-tied guest, as Elephant Boy always fantasized about being with not just one, but two women at once. What can I say? The guy liked what he liked. I always wonder if any Wack Packers have ever used their notoriety from being on the Stern Show to help sleep with groupies. Imagine being so desperate to screw a star that you sleep with the cast of the Howard Stern Wack Pack. I mean, Elephant Boy is one of the least offensive members, compared to, say, High Pitch Eric, but still. Angel was the only promised woman present, as Bim had prior obligations. She was getting a rod removed from her throat. However, this wouldn't be an issue as Elephant Boy was happy just to get whatever he could get his hands on. Angel was sporting 46 double Ds and Fred was a titty man, so he was gonna be in hog heaven. She even brought along her friend, Jackie, to fill the role of Bim in their forthcoming resizing. We all know Fred was packing that schmeat. Unfortunately, there is no video of this visit, but Stern claimed the women were both wearing leather apparel. These ladies of ill repute were members of the Leather and Lace Motorcycle Club, an MC that was buying women for women. Who knows, maybe Fred secretly wanted a motorcycle mama to step on his sack and call him a good boy. Judging by how I've seen a lot of people act online, that desire is probably more common than I initially thought. Now, these women did their thing and gave him a Bronski on the radio. Now, I've seen my fair share of degenerate crap. I've been on the internet for most of my life, but I had no idea what a Bronski was. A quick Google search confirmed it's when someone's face is placed between two tatas and they're subsequently smacked and battered repeatedly with said jumblies. I don't really understand how that's supposed to get someone off, but sure, why not? Fred jumped at the opportunity, immediately removing his headphones and glasses to receive his double Bronski from two women that had been passed through more than a busy tunnel. By the end, Fred was gasping for air, thrilled by the experience he just had. Four massive breasts smacking him right in the noggin. Maybe if one of them gave him a good smack on the mouth with their bosom, it'd have corrected his way of speaking. At least, I'd imagine that's the excuse he could have used to get an encore.
Fred, was that a good experience for you?
Oh, fantastic.
Really, you like that, huh?
I wish I brought my pecker meter.
Hey, easy, honey.
Sorry,
huh?
honey.
Calm down there.
Fred was putting his arms around the girls. Did you see that?
I
Yeah.
didn't see anything.
Oh, I saw it plenty. I saw too much. Fred, you looked really happy.
Oh,
What?
sir. Can I say something personal? Rick, it was great.
It was great.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that was not the end of this misadventure, as Howard convinced Angel to lather up one of her milk monsters with ice cream and let Elephant Boy lick it off. In hindsight, I think it's actually totally understandable why people wanted to silence the Stern Show, but I'm just thankful it survived despite everything. Granted, I won't touch what it's turned into in the modern age, I just enjoy the perverse, hilarious memories. After the brief fun bag assault, the show ushered the ladies out and the Dial-A-Date event was finally about to begin. Before the host would dive into the topic, they wanted to know more about how the potential outing would go. Firstly, if he were to get lucky, it's imperative that they know more about his tallywhacker. They just had to get the details, inquiring about how much meat he was packing. Fred, being the modest man that he was, lied and said that it was average. But I can guarantee you that even if his dingling was on the shorter side, he most definitely had some pendulous nuts to keep it held up.
Let's tantalize the babes. What are you packing? Tell them. 7, 8?
It's average.
Eight.
I never
He just
took
said
a
8.
measure.
Now, where would you like to take a girl on a fantasy date?
Probably just sometimes dance club. I like to dance.
Dance a little bit?
Yeah.
Ooh, put on some music, Howard.
You just want to dance right now, Rob. Well, let's just hope you go somewhere where you don't have to ask for directions, because you'll never get there. All right, let's get to the phones.
Next up, where would Elephant Boy take a potential date if something actually pans out? Fred said that he wanted to take a girl to a dance club because he likes to shake his fucking groove thing. If he was going to dance clubs and wasn't having any success in courting a mate, perhaps his dancing was also yet another contributing factor to his lonely lifestyle. An outing like that would probably ruin the entire date, but I admire his confidence. When asked what he was looking for in a woman, Fred took the reasonably safe route and said that he wanted a woman with a nice personality. Out of the many guests that Howard had featured on his show over the years, Elephant Boy was easily the most humble, at least publicly anyway. Given his ailments, he wasn't trying to shoot above what he felt he was worth. Modesty does go a long way.
What are you've thought about a girl you might like. What would she be like?
I thought I want a nice girl, with not a girl who enjoys life. I'm not personality. That's all I ask for.
All right, what Fred just said is he wants someone young, attractive, and he must have most of their limbs. All right? All right.
Most, not all. He's not picky.
Howard checked the lines, and there were multiple women who were waiting to shoot their shot with Freddie Boy, calling from New York, Philadelphia, and Washington respectively. Caller number 1 was tapped into the show, her voice being heard by thousands of listeners, and most importantly, Fred the Elephant Boy. The woman on the line claimed to be a go-go dancer, just the kind of woman Fred needed in his life, someone with experience that would guide him through the entire process of intimacy. She wasn't fazed by his voice or difficulty with speaking, and she definitely wasn't bothered by by him being a 30-year-old virgin. She believed that because she'd been married 3 times, she'd been around the block and seen it all. What women previously rejected him for was something that she didn't care about.
All right, now, what about you? Are you an attractive girl?
Yeah, I'm a go-go dancer.
Oh, you're a go-go dancer?
Oh.
Wait a second, I would let her play, Fred. How old are you?
33.
33 and a go-go dancer? Got a good body?
Yeah.
And you think that if you are attracted to Fred a little bit, there could be a sexual opportunity there?
Of course.
I gotta be honest with you. This guy's 30 years old. He's a virgin, and the only reason he's
I've been married 3 times. I can handle it.
Okay, good. Because the only
So you
reason
know what you're doing.
I swear to you, the only reason he's a virgin
Yeah.
is because of the voice thing.
That's no problem.
Because I'm looking at him. Believe me.
This woman showed a lot of potential, or at least about as much potential as you can get from speaking into a phone for a radio broadcast. But you get what I mean. Howard and Robin were confident that this woman could give him exactly what he needed. Now I doubt she'd perform some kind of corrective surgery to solve his verbal hindrance, but helping him hide his sausage is a good start. This contender was already screwing around with a handful of guys, which meant she knew what the boys liked. This could work to Fred's advantage, as after 30 years of celibacy, he likely wanted his hand held a bit when his meat was being handled. I'm having way too much fun tap dancing around the fact that the show was whoring him out. She went on to detail how she was currently hopping around between men and the many experiences of group sex she'd had. This still did not deter Fred, simply saying that she sounded nice. Well, shit. That's certainly one way to put it.
And were you in the club wearing like a mini skirt and dressed very?
Probably.
I see.
Or something like spandex pants or something. Shorts
I
or
see.
something.
Some shorts.
Yeah.
You like to dress
Cowboy
like that, huh?
hat. Huh?
You like to wear a cowboy hat and easy,
Oh,
Fred.
yeah. Leather.
Fred's like,
I'm into leather.
Fred, you digging her?
She's so nice.
All right, we got to take a break. You hold on there.
The next woman on the dating line was Celeste, the woman Howard spoke of before. This lady attempted to sleep with another loser who moseyed their way into the studio. Unfortunately, the guy was unable to perform under pressure. However, the show's hosts were pretty sure that Fred would be a better candidate for her snatch anyway. Celeste didn't need some kind of marketing pitch to be sold on taking Fred inside of her. Howard could have thrown anybody her way and she likely would have been game. The only thing she was concerned about was his height, with Fred replying that he stood at a solid 5 foot 10 inches. Fred, however, did want to know her age, with her being a staggering 10 years older than him. I guess 40 is old enough to know what you want. Yet again, another potential suitor for the elephant boy. Despite this, Celeste did have mobility problems, dragging her leg behind her as she walked. While I'm not trying to disparage the woman, most men are going to be turned off by something like that. Fred was a true man among boys and wasn't going to let some kind of disability stand in his way. He desired to pound some fur burger and nothing was going to stop him from pulling it off. Fred was pretty wooed by this contestant, referring to her as lovely. Man, he was just drowning in potential pussy. He must have been in hog heaven. It's a good thing that standards are up to interpretation. After Celeste, yet another woman who was eager to grease Elephant Boy's pole called the show. This woman was 23 years old and just hearing Fred's dulcet tones was enough to get her all buttered up, and then some. Howard pried about her sexual past, but she claimed that she was mostly inexperienced, refusing to share too many details on the air. In reality, she preserved her public character. Good move on her part, but then again, she was calling in to seduce Elephant Boys, so, you know. Regardless of how mum she was on her past, she was still willing to sleep with Fred as long as he was down. Perhaps she felt the temperature of the water gradually rising as the other promiscuous women voiced their eagerness to snipe Elephant Boy's virginity. She even dropped her protective barrier and shared that she allegedly had another female friend who'd willingly participate in a collaboration on Fred's pee-pee, as long as he's cool with being dominated. You know, prior to researching this video, I was not anticipating having to sift through this much smut this early in his story, but hey, shit happens.
Okay.
Now, if the other girls have made promises here. Now, I don't know if they're going to keep them, but I know that number 2 would. They've made promises to actually sleep with Fred, sight unseen. Now, would you go as far to do that?
Yes.
You would?
As a matter of fact, you were saying about number 1 if she had a friend. And I have a friend who would definitely be interested 2-on-1. That's like our sexual fantasy to dominate a guy.
Really?
Yeah?
Well, we just hit a jackpot.
Whoa.
Now, Cindy, all I know is I speak normally. I can't get girls to call in for me like this.
She continued to divulge in her drunken misadventures with her friends and the many illicit parties she participated in. It's almost a wonder why she was such a prude in the beginning. After much deliberation, continuous discussion of romantic encounters, assorted commercial breaks, and unintelligible ramblings from Fred, it was time for him to make his decision and voice his opinion on who was worthy to receive his mighty pecker. He racked the decision around in his head for however long, counting his fingers and considering all of the different tales of degeneracy that he was subjected to, eventually setting on choosing contestant number 3. The other girls weren't sore losers, but perhaps they dodged a bullet. And I do mean that in the nicest possible way, even though it makes me sound like a fucking asshole. Howard congratulated Elephant Boy, wishing him a wonderful time before Fred inevitably swam around in the moist cavern. All he wanted in return was for Fred and the lucky lady to record their experience so the show's host could watch it and review it live. Unfortunately, Wack Packers recording themselves receiving stimulation was going to be a recurring trend for the foreseeable future. This is actually something that happened to a handful of other Wack Pack members as the years went on. But, to nobody's shock, he ultimately didn't sleep with this woman. He would later lie on the show and say that he got something out of her, but he was hesitant to share this information because he was worried it'd negatively reflect on the woman he was supposed to bang. I mean, to be fair, she was calling into the show to throw herself at him for no real gain on her end, so it's not like her public reception was going to be warm or jovial.
So you came on the show, I got you a date, and you did not get laid from that date, did you?
No.
And you lied.
And you told us you did.
Only because I don't want to make the girl look bad. You know?
You felt bad for the girl that she had to have sex with you.
Yeah, that's it. I don't like to badmouth people.
Well, you mean you didn't want her to look bad, so you lied and said you had sex with her?
Yeah.
And you were as blue as the shirt you're wearing, but you felt bad for her.
Right.
Fred would later return sometime later for another round of dial-a-date where he'd land an outing with a sexual surrogate, or rather a surrogate partner. This person did eventually show him the ways of the woman. Surrogate partners are people who help others deal with problems regarding sexuality, intimacy, and everything else in between. In some cases, they even engage in sexual contact with their client depending on what the end goal is. It's essentially just prostitution with extra steps. Being able to finally sleep with a woman really changed Fred's perspective on the world. In a place where all he could see is various shades of gray, he finally had life by the balls. All thanks to a radio show stepping in to put him on the right track. To be fair, if the scent of coochie is all it takes for you to get where you need to be, maybe your life is a little out of whack. Regardless, Elephant Boy would continue to dip his stick in the dating pool as the years went on. On July 29, 1994, he made another appearance at the Stern studio for an interview, bringing along his new girlfriend, Mary. At this point, it had been 5 years since Stern gave a little assistance to Fred, who was still riding the high of having joined the elite class of former virgins. Fred felt as though he was still somehow indebted to the show, willing to show up whenever they were willing to have him on. Being mostly unsuccessful in the dating scene was not going to dissuade him from trying to live his best life, at least to the best of his ability. So what if women thought he was intellectually impaired because of his speech impediment? He revealed during this interview that he was placed in special education as a child despite his mental acuity because of his way of speaking, leading educators to not know exactly what to do with him. The education system was fundamentally different back then, but I shouldn't have to explain that. His educational placement also affected his relationships with other students, as they would bully him because he was different. Turns out that he was placed in normal classes in the 6th grade. When all of this understandably took a toll on his mental health and he began to lash out in an attempt to defend himself, school faculty would scold him and tell him to ignore the loudmouthed idiots. But you and I both know that sometimes some people just need a quick pop in the mouth. Fred, for all intents and purposes, understood that too. It had been some time since Fred had last felt the loving touch of a woman who was willing to share herself with him in the most delicate and personal of ways. And as a man in his prime, respectfully, he wanted more. He had since befriended a classy woman named Jo Lynn who was an exotic dancer. She was only friends with him due to his ties with the show. Sure, she had been on before, but there's only so many times you can show your body to someone before the initial magic wears off, you know?
So let's just say that you had sex and then it was a big dry spell.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
Since the doctor up 2-3 years ago, you know.
What? How long ago was what?
It sounds like 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, 2 or 3 years ago you had sex for the first time, and so it's been a 3-year dry spell.
Yeah.
Maybe longer.
Yeah, about, yeah.
Anyway, while Fred appreciated their friendship, it was clear that being around her was causing some kind of sexual tension in his life. I mean, to be fair, he was being subjected to sex appeal non-stop and can't even get a woman in bed without some radio show lending their very rich hand, so his frustration is understandable. Jo Lynn wasn't the only girl in Elephant Boy's posse, as he brought along his actual girlfriend from Cleveland, Ohio, Mary. The two were pursuing a long-distance relationship, and we all know how that tends to go. This was the early 90s, and means of communicating were far more simplistic and limited at this time. At best, they could talk on the phone every day, but that could only go so far. This was an age before video chats and instant messaging, so I guess they just had to make do. This in-person appearance was one of only a handful of times where they had been together physically, which caused Howard and Robin to poke a little fun at their situation. The host believed that because the two had only been together in person a handful of times, that their relationship was not real or built upon a strong foundation.
How often do you guys get to see each other?
This is the first time we saw each other since the funeral.
So how can you call yourself a girlfriend? You're somebody who talks to on the phone.
Robin.
Oh, we talk every day on the phone.
Yeah, you talk every day on the phone, and now you've only seen each other in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And now here.
And now here. So you've only really been together like 2 or 3 days total.
Yeah.
Physically.
Right.
Fred met her when he was leaving Cleveland to return to New York. He was about 2 hours out from fleeing the state when Mary approached him and asked for his autograph. I guess 2 hours in an airport is enough time to really learn enough about someone to give them your contact details and begin a long-term telephone correspondence on the off chance you'll find love. But what do I know? Isn't this some kind of sappy junk that someone would want to turn into a movie? Seems romantic enough to me. Mary had 2 kids, being 3.5 and 6 at the time, and escaped an unpleasant marriage. Pursuing women who had already been around the block was one of Fred's recurring traits. Hey, the guy had a type. She even worked for the Postal Service, while Fred was still in shipping and handling, whatever that means. Point is, they both handled the shipment of things for the government. Perhaps they both bonded over the transport of packages and documents. A shared interest is always a healthy addition to a blossoming relationship. The two began phone correspondence as soon as Elephant Boy returned home. They'd have nightly calls, talk about their interests and desires, and of course eventually this led to them discussing their sensitive feelings. You know the kind, the ones that make you do things that are really uncharacteristic, and make you think you can't exist without a certain person. The really complicated emotions that stem from talking to somebody through a series of wires for an extended period of time. Fred, in simplest terms, was in love.
So now I still want to know about these conversations.
Yeah, okay, so you have these conversations, and does Elephant Boy profess his love for you over the phone?
Schreiber said.
You know what you should do? I was thinking about this.
What?
You should have a dentist shoot your mouth full of Novocaine before you talk to Elephant Boy on the phone, and then it would be an even playing ground.
Oh, no.
2 days prior to this interview, Mary flew to New York at her expense to spend time with Elephant Boy and accompany him on the show. When she arrived, they hugged and kissed and all of that cutesy stuff, drove over to his mother's house and had dinner with her, and of course into the night with a hot, steamy boot-knocking session at the hotel. There's nothing more romantic than meeting your partner's mother. You heard it here first. Actually, don't quote me on that. That sounds fucking terrible. This was like a dream for Fred. He was on cloud freaking 9. Not only was he getting to smash pissers with a woman, but she was showering him with affection and he could reciprocate. Things were finally looking up for him.
The lights are up.
Meanwhile, you want to grab her in your arms and have sex with her, don't you?
We was getting more often. We was using our tongues.
Oh, so you were getting some kissing during TV? And what were you watching on TV?
Who remembers?
Right. You were busy.
There was a horror film in the bedroom.
But you were a little uncomfortable. But Elephant Boy, there was a horror film going on.
This interview really allowed Elephant Boy to come out of his shell. To be fair, I could have lived happily without having to imagine what they looked like during. Just close your eyes and imagine Elephant Boy, all sweaty and glistening, going in for 3 rounds of beating cheeks. Are you hot and bothered yet? I sure hope not. Elephant Boy would return to the show yet again in just a few months, on September 12, 1994. Billboard magazine had given Howard an award for being the most outstanding syndicated radio personality for 1994. Historically, Howard never fancied accepting awards himself and giving speeches and everything else that goes with it. Most people who have this problem will opt to send a close friend or significant colleague to collect their award, but Howard has always been different. He wanted to send one of his guys. He wanted to send Fred the Elephant Boy for obvious reasons. I mean, think about it. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who's been working in the radio business for years. You've worked hard. You've pushed the boundaries of your medium. You do everything you can to get ahead, and you're beaten by a guy who interviews porno stars and disabled people. Then he sends one of his notoriously mush-mouthed cronies to collect the award right in front of you. It's fucking genius, really. He owed a great deal of his adult pleasures to Howard, so why not do this for him? Fred got all dressed up, brought a lady friend with him, and mingled with all of the other radio personalities.
Anyway, Elephant Boy, you were good enough to, so you went to the Billboard Awards with Elephant Boy?
Now, where were they?
In New York at the New York Hilton.
Oh.
And so...
At the New York Hilton? Was everyone dressed up?
Yeah, I was dressed up. I was wearing a suit.
And what was everyone else wearing? Suit?
Yeah.
The ceremony was set up in a way where nobody was supposed to give an acceptance speech. They'd call your name, you'd go on the stage, accept your award, you'd receive applause, and then you'd return to your seat. This was not going to prevent Fred from completing his objective. He hopped up on the stage when Howard's name was called, accepted the award, and snatched a microphone to begin babbling. He told it like it was, trust me. Don't believe me? Listen to this guy spit some facts and logic.
Thank you. On behalf of Howard, many people are starving in Russia, and all you do is to celebrate. 101 people crash on an airplane, and all you think you can do is to drink and make merriment. I condemn you. Howard condemns you. Good evening. This is our gracious and Baba Booey to all of you.
After the event, Stern staffers interviewed some of the attendees, and of course Fred helped them in the process. But one particularly slack-jawed ignorant idiot really took offense to the gag, resorting to making personal attacks against Elephant Boy. Regardless, Fred took the ribbing like a champ, and this guy showed how much of a butthurt loser he is.
Do you ever wish you can actually be Howard one day?
I'm a little heavy for Howard, and I'm not Jewish.
F you.
What'd you think of Fred the Elephant Boy's speech?
Howard. Pretty lame for Howard's show, to be honest with you. I thought Howard did much better. I kind of was looking for Stuttering John, to be honest with you. He brings some.
No, I bet the next Stuttering John.
You suck, to be honest with you. Don't get mad at me.
Thank you.
I'll knock your ass out. I ain't lying.
Well, just until we come to Tampa, we're going to kick your butt. When we come to Tampa, we will kick your butt.
Homie, I'm at night, so. You know.
I know.
That's not the only thing you can say. When we come to Tampa, we're going to kick your butt. Who cares? Who cares? You're not doing the show. Howard is. You're just a little do-boy. Okay? You're not doing Howard's show. You're a little do-boy. Howard probably didn't even pay you for this. You're a groupie. You're a little Howard Stern groupie. If you're gay, you'd do him.
Oh, man, Papa, if you
can't even speak right. Don't make a fat joke. It's so obvious. Go ahead and make a fat joke.
Okay.
Hey, that's how stupid you are. You can't even think of me. Get off me. Homie, give me an air check for Howard. I got my little homeboys running around here too, but they can speak correctly. Puerto Rican too. Give him a little Spanish. This guy gave me Jewish. Give me some Spanish. Come on, homeboy, give me some Spanish. Yeah. Come on, Howard's do boy. Howard's got his Jewish do boy. I got my little sponge do boy. We'll kick your ass. I ain't lying. Me versus you. Come on. Give him some of that Spanish stuff. I'm on. See? Where's your beanie cap? Where's your beanie cap at? Where's your beanie cap at?
The following month, on October 20th, 1994, Fred reappeared once more to talk about a fresh feud he had with Captain Jenks, a prolific practical joker who made himself known by prank-calling live TV shows and radio stations. During the previous weekend, Elephant Boy was interviewed regarding his participation in the development of Howard Stern's film adaptation of his autobiography, Private Parts. But there's something even more important than this. The weekend before this one, he was in Cleveland, Ohio with his girlfriend Mary. So Mary was a bit of a wild card, and she had a friend who was both bisexual and an exhibitionist, who would be willing to engage in a three-way with the both of them. Instead of engaging in said threesome, Fred ended up taking photos of himself with the lower half of a blow-up doll. How the hell does something like that even happen?
Why, if you have two women with real private parts, why do you end up in the room with a rubber vagina?
I didn't want to do the other girl because I didn't know who was her past partner. So
you mean you had two girls and you didn't do them? So how do you end up with a?
We went to like a sex stuff. She cut herself, and get set and.
To top it all off, Fred got embarrassed because his mother was listening to the show. I mean, this was bound to happen. Thousands upon thousands of people can listen at any given moment, and he doesn't mind. But one particular person catches it, and now he's upset? It was going to happen one way or another. He should have considered the possible outcomes of being involved with a public broadcast. Anyway, during Elephant Boy's interview, Captain Jenks was waiting for his turn to talk, and he was growing increasingly impatient. To Fred's chagrin, Jenks got so restless that he decided to prank call Elephant Boy's mother. I'm not entirely sure how he got her phone number so quickly. He either looked her up swiftly or he had that number in his back pocket. Either answer is concerning. Jenks thought that it would be funny to ask her perverse questions. Fred did not share this same opinion, offended that somebody would even stoop that low. He vowed to never speak to him again after this appearance because he was hurt on such a deep emotional level.
So Elephant Boy shows up to be interviewed for my movie.
Uh-huh.
Ratso's doing the interview, and Captain Jenks, who makes all the phony phone calls to Larry King and all of that, gets really upset because he's waiting and while they interview Elephant Boy. So in his spare time, he gets so bored, he starts making phony phone calls to Elephant Boy's mother.
Jenks, how to begin? It's one thing, to be Captain Jenks, like to Larry King or Dunhill, or to whatever, anybody in the media. But when you talk to my brother, that's personal. There should be a limit there. I don't care if you have too much to drink or too much too big to smoke.
Did you have too much to drink?
Or too big to smoke?
Yeah,
Did you have too much to smoke or drink? No. When you call, don't act stupid.
The discussed perverse question was Captain Jenks asking Fred's mom if she had any poop-related stories from Fred's youth. I can't imagine her reaction to the question was positive. Captain Jenks was in a losing argument with Fred, which was impressive considering Jenks didn't have any kind of difficulty speaking. He repeatedly tried to apologize, saying that he attempted to do so before, but his attempts were consistently shot down by Fred, because he said that his mom was really upset by the call. I understand why Fred was so pissed about this. Family is always off limits.
We had this resolved on the phone. Obviously, you think that we should bring it on the air. That's fine if we have to.
But there's, a limit. I'm not doing it
so what
just
do you
for
want?
me. I'm doing it out of respect for my mother. I don't let nobody take offense with my mother. I don't care if you
I'm sorry.
I don't care if you call me a mama's boy.
You're right, Fred.
I'm not going to call you that.
Fred, I know your mother. It's not like I never met her before.
You betrayed his trust.
Fred was so serious about all of this that he was willing to cut off the Wack Pack entirely, saying that he would never participate in their bullshit ever again. Considering how important he was as a member, essentially being a pioneer, there was no chance he'd eventually escape from the clutches of the Wack Pack, right? Anyway, back to Fred's struggles with the ladies. His infrequent encounters with women continued for several more years. This sorta came to head on May 16, 1996, as Elephant Boy once again made his way back to the Stern studio to share details about an alleged love triangle that he found himself in. Fred and Mary had broken things off due to difficulties of maintaining a long-distance relationship, and the fact that women were just falling into Fred's lap. Cause one self-respecting woman could honestly say no to his impeccable voice as he trips over his own words with masterclass precision. The previous time Fred was in the studio, which unfortunately I could not find any archives of, Fred had already found himself a new girlfriend named Lori, who was also known as Philly Babe for simplicity. I guess finding a long-distance girlfriend who's closer is more amenable to keep up with when compared to the one in Ohio, but I don't know. It still seems like a lot of work to me. This girlfriend that he managed to court was also already in a committed relationship, thus placing Elephant Boy in quite the pickle. The husband of Philly Babe was fed up with her alleged relationship with Elephant Boy, as he would come home from work and there she'd be, on the phone with him, trying to hide the conversation. I mean, just put yourself in his shoes. Imagine your wife is screwing around with someone like Elephant Boy of all people. Sure, it's bad either way, but with Fred, that's just embarrassing.
Dude, you know that woman you're with is married?
No, really?
What are you doing out there?
She was going after me, like it was nobody, like I was.
Did you ever
special.
ask?
No, because we didn't get into that subject because, I'm not, she called me, like, we accept phone number.
How long you guys been married?
I've been married 10 years, Howard.
Oh, my goodness.
On the 16th, Fred brought in Philly Babe to show off to Howard, Robin, and the greater Stern Show audience. She looked okay. She wasn't a knockout or drop-dead gorgeous, but for 1996, she looked alright. Still out of Elephant Boy's league by a country mile, but maybe that is what made him so hopeful for this romantic escapade. Lori and Fred met at a party that was held a few months prior in February. Fred was sitting by his lonesome, and she and some of her friends decided to strike up a conversation with him because he looked so sad and innocent, peering over with his puppy dog eyes. Through their conversation, she came to discover the beauty that was nestled underneath all of the stuttering and verbal confusion that fell out of Fred's mouth. Rosemary, a friend of Lori who accompanied the Lovebirds, interjected the reason behind Lori's misadventures with Fred were occurring was because Lori's husband was controlling and obsessive, not allowing her to speak to men other than himself. Lori even had children with this man, so out of any possible partner she could have potentially latched onto in hopes of escaping the clutches of her husband and securing the safety of her babies, she chose Fred. I'm not saying Fred is a bad guy or anything, but he's not the type of person you'd imagine being a candidate in this kind of situation.
Well, everything's...
Yeah, but I can tell you, because she's a friend of mine, her husband is just very controlling, and he freaks out if she talks to somebody. I mean, she can't even have a conversation with a guy without her husband. Yeah,
So
first
are you?
she first tired. She just got tired of it.
And now she's looking for the opposite?
And I was calling him, and my husband, when he heard me singing this song to Fred, he freaked out. And he, and that's when I realized this is crazy,
Stern gave Fred and Lori the cue to hop into the recording room, telling his listeners that he felt the entire problem was fishy to begin with, that something just didn't make a whole lot of sense, and he was going to make sure that our favorite verbally challenged guest wasn't getting led astray. When Lori and Rosemary arrived in New York, Elephant Boy gave the duo directions to his place, wherein Lori stayed the night with him. This was curious and piqued the interest of Howard, who understandably wanted to know if the lovers had consummated their relationship. Did Fred and Lori play hide the funny-smelling appendage in the mucus hatch? This, however, was not the only time that they had slept together, as prior to meeting in New York City, Fred went out to Philly and spewed his goo in her there as well.
And she spent the night with me.
She spent the night with you.
Yeah.
So you two have consummated the relationship. You've had sex.
Elephant Boy.
Elephant Boy had sex?
It doesn't, but
Lori revealed that her husband was conveniently away on a business trip, which gave her the opportunity to fly out and visit Fred. Now, this could be real, but it seems to be just way too convenient, at least to me. Something about this just lines up too well considering the years of isolation Fred experienced. And despite his ties to the show, I find it incredibly hard to believe that he truly had women fawning over him in such a way. I mean, come on. Fred was convinced that because Lori and her husband were already having quarrels, that him sticking his ding-dong in her was somehow justified, at least for him. He believed that he needed to do what was best for both him and Lori, and I understand that she may not have been happy in her relationship. Maybe she should have just divorced her husband and got her shit together before jumping feet first into another shaky relationship, especially one that was built upon sneaking around behind someone's back. I'm sorry I keep hammering down on this point, but she really felt the best person to cheat on her husband with was a guy who lives with his mom in a small loft above her garage? I understand everyone has their opinions and preferences, different strokes for different folks, but surely there's got to be a better contender for adultery, right? But Howard couldn't just let all of this stop here. He wanted to know how Elephant Boy was in bed compared to Lori's spouse. She, after some hesitation, confirmed that he's at least a little bit better at pounding her than her hubby. What a nice thing to say on a radio station that was being played in tons of cities and states. Surely this wouldn't cause irreparable damage to their holy matrimony. Just close your eyes for a minute. Picture Fred buck naked, glistening in sweat with his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose, hair sopping wet from all of the action, rigorously and violently rearranging Lori's guts. Do you feel it? Do you feel good about yourself now? This is the type of pain I endure from making these types of videos. And now you partially understand a mere fraction of what this has done to me. I hope you're happy.
Is Elephant Boy good in the sack?
Yeah, he's very good.
He is? Really?
Is he better than your husband?
Maybe.
Well, tell me the truth.
It's embarrassed for her.
Oh, shut up, Elephant Boy.
Elephant Boy, be quiet.
Yes, man.
Now, how many times would Elephant Boy do you in the sack? I mean, would he have sex with you?
15 times.
I mean, he's been saving it up for a long time. Does he do everything? First of all, does he do it all to you?
Yes.
He does. He takes you all. He takes you and really handles
very
it.
Romantic and.
He is.
He's been sitting here smelling his fingers.
Is he really? Yeah. Let me smell your fingers.
Unfortunately for the listeners, Stern was able to deduce that Lori was somebody who particularly enjoyed mouth play, and she appreciated that Elephant Boy was a cunning linguist. Neither party denied it, with Fred confirming it's the one thing he can do with his mouth without problem. Again, picture this. Are you feeling queasy yet? Howard saw a weakness in Fred's stance, asking him what he'd do if Lori was ready to take the next step in the relationship and leave her current partner to be with him. Fred stammered a bit, unsure how to tackle this question, replying that he'd start apartment hunting to accommodate the both of them. I'm sorry, but poontang should never be the motivator to get the hell out of your mom's house. There's plenty of other good, valid reasons to do it. Howard brought up that Lori considered herself a bit of a singer of sorts, as she had contacted the studio prior and mentioned that she had written a love song for Fred and even performed it for him over the phone, which angered her allegedly controlling and abusive husband. If her husband was that bad, why was she so sloppy at hiding the relationship? Her story just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Not to blame the victim, of course, but something definitely felt off. It's also worth mentioning that she intended to play the song for Howard Stern and his audience. As the interview continued, Howard and Robin were noticeably unmoved by their stories, humored at most. Robin believed that Lori was using Elephant Boy to get back at her husband because Lori was well aware of Fred's on-air notoriety, so screwing around with him on a public platform was a means to irritate her husband, who was the person she actually wanted attention from. It sounds like a long con with very little payoff to me. It's certainly not the most well-thought-out plan, but I suppose it'd work.
Now, some people feel that Lori is using Elephant Boy.
I feel that.
You do?
Yes.
Why?
Because I think this woman is really in love with her husband. She's angry at him, so she's banging Elephant Boy to get his attention, and then she'll go back to him. Elephant Boy will be thrown to the curb.
But what does Elephant Boy care? He's getting some sex.
Well, he said he's in love. That's the. But he doesn't even know what that word means.
Lori, is that what's going on? No.
She doesn't know it.
Captain Jenks called in to accuse Lori of being a lying hussy. He'd been at the same parties as Lori and Fred, or most of them at least, and he saw right through her game. He had met her and felt that she was disingenuous, and he had also picked up a woman at one of the same parties who was hiding her marital status, so he felt that she might be cut from the same cloth. I don't know how these two things relate, but maybe he was onto something here. He demanded that she and Fred tongue-kiss to prove that she was actually romantically and physically interested in Elephant Boy. The two kissed right as he said this, but it wasn't with tongue, just another quick peck.
What's that?
Did you get laid?
No, I knew she was
well, at least
married,
Elephant Boy got laid.
No, well, I don't believe that. Lean over Lori and tongue kiss him.
No, I don't.
Oh, no, not that, right, Lori? You wouldn't do that. I know you're using them, and I think it's a horrible thing to do to Fred.
Well,
and,
they're not tongue kissing.
Did
you guys really sleep together, Elephant Boy? You scamming me?
Yes, we did.
Another person ringed in and told Fred that he was being played for a fool, because any woman that was truly in love with him wouldn't care about explaining it on the radio and playing music to prove it, but instead would be content with his presence and do what she could to make him feel good. It started to become very apparent that something about this story just wasn't quite right. While sure, it's hard to believe that someone would throw their marriage and children under the bus just to get their music heard by thousands of people, but at the same time, the entertainment business has historically always been whacked out of its mind. Gary Delabate, the large-toothed eldritch being that also happens to be the show's executive producer, barged in like he always does and grabs Fred's microphone to interject that he had already heard this story and it was a bunch of nonsense that Fred, Lori, and her husband concocted to get airtime. He even alleged that her husband was in New York at that very moment. The lie was starting to crumble and fall apart, but the pieces were also starting to line up and tell the true story. I mean, why tell people in over half of the United States that you're cheating on your husband with the man sitting right next to you, but then you won't tongue kiss him? Why go so far and then give so little?
I got to tell you, Howard, I got a bunch of phone calls. These people that are on Prodigy, they're so tight-knit that they're afraid that they'll be found out, so nobody will come on the air. But 3 different people called me and said that this whole thing is a scam, that they've been working on this for months, that everybody on Prodigy knows about it, and that her husband's here in New York.
Fred started to crack under pressure, smiling and giggling, trying to maintain his composure. Howard didn't seem too enthused by this, but he was probably happy to have some kind of drama on the radio. But he still wanted to know more. Stern investigated the situation further by asking Lori to swear on her children that her husband was not in New York. She, however, said that he may be there because he was on a business trip and she didn't know anything. Right. Just as the story was starting to hit a bit of a snag, a convenient phone call came through the call-in line. It was Brian, Lori's husband, and he was pissed. Brian threatened violence against Elephant Boy, which is understandable considering that Fred was allegedly inserting his phallus into Brian's lady friend. Fred spit back with an alarming amount of vigor, stating that Brian wouldn't be in the position that he's in if he had paid more attention to his dutiful wife and his wonderful children. Big talk from a guy who can't even say what he means without tripping over his own words and fucks married ladies. He even told Brian that his relationship with Lori was over, speaking on her behalf as if he had complete control over her life. If this story was true, then it'd make Fred as bad as Brian. Howard asked Brian what city he was in, and of course, Brian responded New York City. How opportune. Fred was willing to compromise despite everything that was going on. If Brian would make him a promise and follow through with giving his wife attention, Fred would stay out of his way. This meant very little to Brian, as he claimed that he was done with Lori's shit. In response to this, Fred called him a loser. Probably not a good move if the guy was in New York City. I like Fred, but I could never see him winning a fight. The front desk of the hotel that Brian was staying at entered the call to let Brian know that they had an emergency call for him, which was ignored. Gary burst back into the studio and claimed that he was the one making the emergency call, as he knew exactly what hotel and room number that Brian and Lori were staying in, meaning this really was all a crock of shit. Brian immediately fessed up, interjecting that Elephant Boy put him up to it. Fred was immensely apologetic and trying to suggest that he was only trying to pull off something that hadn't been done on the radio before. In my mind, this cemented Elephant Boy's business practices, wasting valuable airtime with a bunch of fake nonsense. Gary was pretty pissed because of how badly Fred's shtick delayed the show, especially considering how lenient they are with him.
I'll tell you, man, I'm really disappointed. I'm going to tell you why. No, I'm going to tell you why. But let me explain to you why. Of all the people on the show, you have an open invitation here.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me just finish. Captain Jenks, I put on like 1 out of every 10 times he calls. But when you call, we clear the schedule, we put you on, and you're good and funny in and of yourself. Yeah. What's in it for you to be connected with them? You put us behind. No, we won't be doing Robin's News today because Howard's got to do the movie. But you know what? You're a funny guy in and of yourself. Why do you have to make stuff up?
No, it was just like I think because when it comes to practical jokes.
Even though the Stern Show helped Fred come out of his shell, thus allowing him to finally experience the touch of a woman, he'd continued to surprise us as time went on. Perhaps he wanted more out of the world than just a woman to sleep with. Maybe what he needed was something a touch spicier to add some flair to the monotony of his day-to-day life. In 1997, shortly after the new year, Fred made yet another trip to the Stern Show studio to babble into a microphone and overshare about the finer points of his personal life. Just the kind of thing that Stern's many listeners needed to hear on their morning commute to work. Fred's lady friend Mary purportedly had a friend named Sharon who was interested in pursuing a relationship with crackhead Bob. Elephant Boy hoped that maybe they could have some kind of romantic double date. Fred and Mary were swingers or something similar, and knowing that they wanted that kind of double date concerns me. What if they were going to get this friend and crackhead Bob to join them for a little bit of group fun? I really didn't need that image in my head, and now I feel the need to scrub my brain with a sponge and dish soap.
She thought it would be a good thing, maybe like to go out with crackhead Bob and maybe double date.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And now she says
because I mean to play a goof.
No, this is not good.
To play a goof on Crackhead, I mean, you're in the same league with Crackhead Bob. You have a speech impediment.
And you know what that's like.
I know. I mean, I this not be BS. I think she get she a bad case of the nerves.
Mary and Sharon entered the studio, and without any hesitation, Howard Stern asked Mary if Fred was into swinging. She wouldn't directly confirm or deny this accusation, which led Stern to play a clip of Fred that he had received from some male listener. Turns out, Fred had found a listing in the paper for a matchmaking service that specialized in intimate interactions. You know, the old in-out, in-out. He, of course, proceeded to call in and specified that he was looking for a couple that would allow him to be a third wheel. All he really wanted was for the male to be bisexual, so he could be the meat in the sandwich. Is that too much to ask? Is that too vulgar? Too bad.
Hi there, couples. I'm looking for a couple in the 30s or 40s in which the male is bi. I am a white male, 38 years old. I'm 5'10", 165 pounds. I'm 12 inches free. I got the Higgins, and I'm looking to have a discreet, sexual encounter with a couple. If this interests you, leave a message. It's box 5028.
I think it's truly fascinating that Elephant Boy wanted to be a unicorn to an already established relationship. He totally deserved to have a discreet sexual encounter with random people he didn't even know. I mean, he'd worked hard for this kind of stuff for so long. Why couldn't a couple leave their door just ajar enough that he could get in there and do his thing? I also love how he really thought that this wouldn't get back to the show. I mean, the show was huge at this point in time, and it was still rapidly growing. He's got a pretty unique voice too, so it should have came to no surprise that somebody would recognize that very word delivery and cadence. What a class act. Gary barged into the studio yet again to inform Boff about yet another detail that the show's host was failing to bring up. There was an even more damning detail that verified the authenticity of this call. The service required the caller to leave their name and contact details. When he did this, he of course left his name. Ouch. Better luck next time, Elephant Boy.
After the tone, please record your message for
Fred.
Hit any key to end your message.
Yeah, how many guys named Fred talk like that?
Yeah.
So what are you doing?
It was a quack.
You're looking for a bisexual...
No, I'm not like that.
You want a couple where the guy is bi.
We was making stuff up, and that's why we come to. We always try to be.
I always thought you were like a real nice guy.
Yeah, I am, but like I say, if you go by the 10, maybe I'm not buying real off. I am.
Fred was flustered, stammering and tripping over his own words as per usual, trying his best to cover up the true story. He attempted to insist that he was playing a joke. It was all a goof. I mean, who doesn't call up a personals line looking for a bisexual male to juice and squeeze for laughs? It's like the straightest form of humor. After several minutes of laughing at the ad that Fred made, Howard shifted his attention back to Mary while Fred was still fumbling around. Mary and Elephant Boy had recently broken up due to some personal familial problems. Allegedly, her ex-lover learned about who he was replaced with, and it wasn't really going over well. I don't know how a previous flame has anything to do with what was happening at that given moment, but sure, any reason to dump Fred to the side, I guess. At least he could call up a bisexual hotline and order up a stiff pole attached to the man of his dreams without having to feel guilty. Howard was still shocked by all of this, and was still very encouraging of their relationship. He remarked that they were kind of freaky in a good way. The conversation steered right back toward Elephant Boy, who was questioned yet again about his potential bisexuality, which he finally caved to. He admitted that while he was younger, there was a little bit of experimenting going on while he was trying to figure himself out. Fred pondered everything for a moment, trying to find all the words to accurately explain his feelings about other men. He made a valiant effort to suggest that all of this happened because it was just a couple of guys being dudes, you know? Sometimes two bros just hang out with their things out and get busy because they've got nothing better to do. It's not gay if it's with the homies.
You know, it wasn't the past. You know.
What, were you molested? You were molested?
No, it sounds like he was into it.
As you said before, two, how do you say, two horny guys.
Right, two horny guys and some young guys and...
And what'd you do?
What, you have like a sword fight or something?
Yeah, you know, like the thing you used to do in the homo room.
Oh, in the homo? Man, that's worse.
Oh, my God,
I mean, not that stuff, you know, to
So you're not opposed to, like, handling a guy?
No, not
How
really.
far
I was never, you know, I was never against,
Was the guy screwed up too, like you?
Could he talk straight?
Were they hot guys?
No, it was, I don't how to remember. Remember, you know, I think I have to sing for a long.
Mary was not deterred by Elephant Boy's affinity for both bits of reproductive flesh. She still loved him, and Fred was adamant that he was still madly in love with her. Besides, the past is the past. Everyone's got some kind of baggage, and if the worst thing he's done is fool around with some other people, what's the harm? At least he wasn't like, I don't know, lighting kittens on fire and driving cars into storefronts. If nothing else, let's consider the biggest win for him here. Sure, he might have been embarrassed to have his more intimate details shared on the radio, but if things weren't going to work out with Mary, he was at least opening up to another group of potential mates. Now he definitely would not have to be alone. Unfortunately, he still would not give any sugar to crackhead Bob. That's alright though. Bob is a ladies' man, and Fred being cool with both sides meant that there was now a bit more wiggle room for Bob to get some stink on his hang low. After nearly 30 minutes of dissecting the fluctuating orientation of America's favorite speech-impaired individual, America's other favorite speech-impaired individual moseyed their way into the studio. Crackhead Bob was still fiending for some affection, hoping to cash in on that alleged date that Fred was supposed to set him up with. Sharon, the girl we mentioned earlier that was supposed to go out for a night on the town with Mr. Bob Harvey, was a bit mortified when she saw him stumble into the studio, dragging his bad leg behind him. I don't know what she was expecting when his name was Crackhead Bob, but her standards shouldn't have been that high, right? Fred made sure to let everyone know that he wasn't going to try any gay stuff with Bob. Crackhead Bob, of course, was a stud and a gift to the ladies. He immediately said that he was not interested. Robin made sure to ask Bob if he would be able to defend himself if Fred made any unwanted advances, to which Bob was confident that he'd be able to handle his own. Can you imagine these two swinging fists in a steel cage match over some questionable advances one made toward the other? I would definitely pay to see that. Anyhow, after this, Elephant Boy would continue to have his usual interactions with women, even after faking a stupid love triangle and professing his love for Pee-Pee. On June 6, 1997, Fred made a trip to the studio with another Wack Packer, this time Croy. Croy is a mentally ill woman who is convinced that Ronald Reagan stole her architectural plans, along with many other things. She is also known for dressing in scantily clad outfits that were intended for people about 30 or 40 years younger than her, and in better condition too. All things considered, she's a prime candidate for a video, so I'll have to keep her in mind. Croy was still riding the high of previously having been at a venue owned by Donald Trump, or at least that's what she was saying anyway. She might have just had some powdered courage in the restroom before. She was also thrilled to have received mail from the King and Queen of England. She must have been up to some pretty important shit. I'm sure that letter was not a gag in any way, shape, or form. Elephant Boy was standing beside her, sporting a cap and a long curly black wig. He had been keeping a low profile since the movie premiere back in March. After kicking his feet up and relaxing, he was ready to get back in the game.
Fred, where you been lately?
I saw the last World Jurassic Park movie. I've been taking it easy since the movie premiere. lay low, be quiet, and enjoying my life.
Upon entering the studio and Croy got her babbling out of the way, the topic of Fred's recent alleged scorn of another Wack Packer was brought up. You see, Fred was set to appear in private parts, but Crackhead Bob had also been recorded for the film doing the same things that Fred did, and ultimately Bob's takes were used while Fred's were cut. But he wasn't upset. I've made a video on Crackhead Bob, and if you haven't seen it, I definitely think you should. It's pretty alright. Fred believed that his big days on the show were over. He had experienced his 15 minutes of fame and it was time for someone else to come in and sweep the show off its feet and replace him. He was fine with the change. Gary hopped on the horn, surprise, surprise, to tell Howard that he had a male caller on the line who boldly claimed that he had recently slept with Elephant Boy. Fred had an on-again, off-again relationship with gay sex, as we're all very aware. Perhaps it was easier for him to confide in the strong, hairy arms of a man who was willing to plow him. Guys, what are we betting here? Was Elephant Boy a top or a bottom?
If you can hold on a second, there's a guy on the phone who had sex with Elephant Boy.
What?
You're kidding me. What's going on with that? You still
You still gay?
You still gay or what? When did you had more gay sex?
Let me listen to him. Who's the guy?
Fred immediately demanded to know who the guy was, so as to ascertain whether or not he should strike vengeance against his possible gay lover. He was claiming that he wasn't doing any gay stuff anymore, but he did seem rather uncomfortable with someone accusing him of still sleeping with men and their penises. But he finally caved, admitting that he had dabbled in the pootie holes of other gentlemen a tiny bit after his last appearance. However, he didn't want Howard or Robin to engage with his most recent homosexual fling, because this guy was allegedly a jerk. Sounds to me like he was trying to obfuscate the truth. They continued to clown on him with the recording of him searching for a couple that wanted a third in their bedroom activities, among other things. How sweet of them. He began to take off his headphones to exit the studio because he was hoping to get his life back on track, acting as if suckling on some dingling was going to destroy the very fabric of his existence. If he was so concerned about his sexual misadventures destroying both his personal and professional life, then maybe he shouldn't have gotten himself involved with the Stern Show. His excuse for his interest is that when he's lonely, and only then, he's willing to sleep with another man. I'm not quite sure why his bisexuality flip-flops depending on his emotional state, but I guess having an episode and sitting on a tallywhacker is probably more common than most people realize. But his explanations didn't stop here. To compound his point, he also said that his loneliness came from his girlfriend Mary not being around. Since they're swingers or something similar to it, it appeared that maybe this was all part of the plan. She could do her thing, he could do his. They could do each other, they could do other people together. The works. I'm sure the loneliness really stemmed from the damage of his impediment, but he sure could get knee-deep in coochie and male booty despite what ailed him. The alleged gay fling was patched into the radio feed, with Howard swiftly answering the phone so he could get the straight scoop. Or the gay one, pick your poison. Fred and Howard immediately hounded the guy to figure out who exactly he was, demanding to know the caller's name. The man would not share this detail about himself, but stated that Fred would know exactly who he is through his voice. Fred was furious, as this man was either spreading baseless lies or was unblurring the truth. Either way, Elephant Boy was not going to stand for this. I mean, he had to get his life back on track, or so he said anyway.
But don't get caught.
What's your name?
Don't give up.
What's your first name?
I'm not giving out my name, but Fred knows exactly who I am. We won 54th and 3rd, and we did engage.
54th thought where?
3rd at my accountant building, and we did engage.
That is a lie. It's a lie.
It is a lie.
Yeah, I was never. I don't hang out in New York. Who are you? You a-hole. I almost said the wrong word.
The former lover continued to share intimate details about his experience with Fred. This person tried to expose Elephant Boy's poor hygiene, asserting that he stank and probably didn't wash his doodads. But then, he professed the biggest truth of all, stating that when Elephant Boy was on the edge of climaxing, that he'd throw his head back and scream, "Gary is a horse-toothed jackass!" It appeared that maybe for once, just maybe, Elephant Boy was in the clear. Baba Booey took the long con joke like a champ, showing his big old choppers and smiling. Fred was vindicated this time. However, this wouldn't be the case in the future. It wouldn't be too terribly long before Fred would make yet another noteworthy appearance. On the 27th of February 1998, Elephant Boy attended the show for yet another interview, but this time, he was sitting at a table with a couple of black Israelites. Oh, and Steve, a guy who wanted to talk about Hitler. I'm sure he had nothing but polite things to say. That's an obvious joke, don't hold my balls to the fire just yet. Out of all of the types of people that could be paired up with Elephant Boy, the endless possibilities that could be picked, of course Howard wanted this group of agitated individuals. Black Israelites are a group of religious fanatics that resort to screaming on street corners, all in an attempt to prove their belief that black people are the direct descendants of the ancient Israelites. I'm not here to poke fun at any particular faith or racial demographic, but I think it goes without saying that being hateful and nasty over opinions on faith or land are not productive. But what do I know? Faith and ownership of land are not my area of expertise. If you want to know more, Wikipedia has quite the informative article. It was a Friday, which meant it was time for the weekly round of the Gossip Game hosted by Mike Walker, a columnist for the National Enquirer. The game had a very simple premise. Mike would read 4 gossip stories and the show's participants would have to guess which one was fake. Surely Elephant Boy and the very quiet and understanding gentlemen who were accompanying him would be able to sniff out the bullshit without much effort. It took about 8 minutes after entering the studio for Fred to finally be addressed, as Howard was enamored by the 2 faith-driven friends.
Elephant Boy, you want to promote something?
Yeah.
Right.
I'll go to be in Fort Myers Beach, Florida, March 6th at Tensitia, Fort Myers Beach.
Really?
Fort Myers Beach.
Is he nervous?
He is. I think you guys are scaring Elephant Boy.
Unfortunately, Fred had to be quiet for several minutes longer because someone called into the show and decided to pick a fight with the Black Israelites, as if either side was going to listen to each other's arguments. Not really sure what they were expecting, but you know. Fred's smart. He knows when it's best to stay quiet. Fred was tripping on his words more than usual. The tension in the air was raising his body temperature, making him sweaty and uncomfortable. Despite this, and this whole appearance being one gigantic waste of time, we did learn the most important detail of Fred's sexual conduct. He once blew a guy. Glad I could put that image in your head. I'm sure you're gonna sleep just great tonight. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Fred would give top-tier sloppy toppy? Inquiring minds want to know.
Elephant Boy had oral sex with a man. Right, Elephant Boy?
Yeah.
Tell the truth. Did you perform oral sex on a man?
One
time. One time is more than one time might as well be 100 times.
Howard asked the Black Israelites what their opinion of Hollywood was, and they took this as an opportunity to tear down Elephant Boy. He didn't like this and decided to leave the studio, refusing to be brought down by anybody. I suppose at least he wasn't going to subject himself to a situation where he was going to be torn apart. Gary managed to stop him and convinced him to stick around so that way he could talk to Howard after the other guys left. Unfortunately, I was unable to find any archives of Fred sitting in after the other guests left.
What's the matter, Freddie?
No, nothing personal. I told him they have the right to say it. I have nothing with them, but I have the same right not to listen to them.
All right, so why don't you go grab a seat in here, and then after they leave, we'll speak to you. Don't leave, because we haven't spoken.
Okay, only for you, Ken.
On September 30th, 1999, Fred returned to the K-Rock Stern Show studio after a night at Scores, a popular gentleman's club and alleged brothel in New York City. Elephant Boy had spent the night about chin deep in coochies and boobies, so he was understandably groggy and even more unintelligible than usual. This definitely meant it to be quite the informative visit. Fred was there to promote the work of a friend of his. As we've established, Fred was really getting into the sex industry, with strip clubs and loose women and drinking and everything else that entails. Through this, he had met some women of dubious career choices, one of which was involved in the creation of adult films. Fred's friend, Abby, had a website where she would produce content at the request of her subscribers, much like you see on services today like OnlyFans. In a hilarious way, Fred was essentially aiding and pioneering internet businesses like we see in these trying times. The reason why Fred was supposed to promote this was because he brought along a tape where he was plowing this friend of his, or so people initially thought. I'm sure this is the exact thing that Howard wanted to see. Fred's reasoning behind getting involved in this business was to prove to the world that while he may have had sexual experiences with men, he is still a lady-killing stud. He could get any woman he wanted if he really set his mind to it, and participating in a business that surrounds sex with money was somehow just as good as pursuing a relationship with a woman. Why couldn't he just be himself instead of trying to prove his sexual worth to people? Just seems kinda strange to me, you know? When Fred and Abby entered the studio, Howard was flabbergasted as to what Fred was even trying to do. As we just established, Fred wanted to prove to Howard and the world that he wasn't just a guy who likes other guys. He liked girls too. Fred misunderstood the shock behind the show's reaction to his antics. It wasn't because they had any issue with him doing gay things, but rather it was shocking because of how they had come to know him. The guy started out with the show by looking for a woman when he was struggling to find any kind of meaningful relationships with the fairer sex. But fast forward time a little bit, now he's playing with both sides and getting knee-deep in a variety of orifices.
Here's the thing. I think you're pretty normal in the sense that you always seem pretty level-headed. It rocked my world when I found out that you were doing some gay stuff. And not that I have anything against gay people. It's just I was shocked because I thought you were so into girls.
That maybe just a girl would be enough.
Yeah, and that rocked my world.
Well, you see, I did because every time I come on the show, that thing is always sent up.
Howard had already heard rumors that were going around about Elephant Boy participating in the production of adult media, but at the time, those were merely just rumors. The rumor suggested that Fred was ashamed of his participation in this full-motion picture, but Fred denied this, stating that he was just waiting to reveal the truth about it because he was worried that if it went directly onto the internet first, that Stern would hear about it and it would ruin the surprise, yada yada yada. I don't get how those two things have anything to do with each other, but I'd imagine he was a little embarrassed. I mean, he'd gotten shy over smaller things he'd done, so surely this had his nerves running wild. Despite this, Howard was not impressed with what he saw. In his own words, it was disturbing. It turns out this video was more of a degrading film, with Fred being turned into a sissy for lack of a better term. He was wearing stockings and had a rubber penis inserted into his body. Howard backpedaled a bit, showing disgust for the act, and even suggested that a man being put in a feminine position so as to cross-dress and insert things into himself is a sign of the times in the United States. This is a mindset that is still commonly seen today. Fred and Abby pushed back, saying that it was just harmless role-playing and plenty of men get stimulation by doing things to their poop shoot. This erupted into a huge argument, with Fred declaring that Howard didn't actually care about him. Whether or not this is true in this argument means nothing because they were both smiling throughout the debate. However, the legitimacy of Howard's care regarding Wack Packer still remains a mystery to this very day.
I'm concerned about Elephant Boy. I think he's going into a dark world.
Howard, you don't give a damn about me. You just give a damn about yourself.
That's not true. How dare you?
No, you're
Where's this coming from?
The person, you know.
That's not the. Why are you attacking me? Why are you attacking me? I care about you.
To really add insult to injury, Fred wasn't even getting paid for this video. Abby used him, abused his anus, then turned a profit from it on her website. Meanwhile, Fred got nothing out of it but a sore butthole and another mark against his reputation. But reputational damage only matters if you allow it to. But what did Fred's mom think about his tarnished character? He was 40 years old at this point, still living with dear old mom and trying to make cash by reverse pooping with a rubber toy. I can't help but imagine she was less than enthused. Not only was he up to some questionable dealings, but these mishaps weren't even bringing in cash. Abby tried to talk over Fred to cover her ass as far as the business part of the deal went, claiming that nobody was getting paid for the video, at least not yet. Her argument was, unsurprisingly, a steaming pile of donkey shit, because even if she wasn't making any cash directly off of the video, she was still using it as a tool to market her business, which in turn would make her significant amounts of money later. She exploited Elephant Boy's loneliness and ties to the Howard Stern show in order to further the reach of her illicit business. So yes, she ultimately was profiting from the creation of the film, even if the cash hadn't rolled in yet. And even then, she wasn't being truthful. Thankfully, Gary barged into the studio like he always did to call her out on her bullshit. The video may not have been available for direct purchase on her website at that exact moment. However, you could access the video along with the rest of the site's contents for $14.95 a month. Funny how that worked out, huh? If she's getting money from the video because people were subscribing to her seedy site, maybe she could have cut Elephant Boy in on the action. But alas, that would just make too much sense, and it'd be a fair business arrangement. We all know you can't have that.
She's talking. All right, here's the deal. She's talking in doublespeak.
Right.
She's going to give out a website where you can go to see the video if you become a member at $14.95 a month.
Elephant Boy seemingly became more distraught and emotional as the interview went on due to the rising tension between Howard and Abby. Fred denied feeling like a jackass for having fallen for such an obvious scam, defending Abby and his own honor by stating that he didn't care what people said about him. Even if he didn't, I'm sure the negative comments were wearing him down. Abby continued to change her story, now claiming that the video was made as a gift of sorts for Howard, to heal the wounds that were created when Elephant Boy received criticism when his bisexuality was exposed to the world. Why couldn't Abby and her employers do business the right and fair way instead of using a man who was suffering from a disability to gain more viewership for her website? Surely there has to be a better, more civil and beneficial way to conduct business rather than the obvious manipulative elements at play. Fred claimed that he was ready to call it quits with the show because he felt like they had already done everything they could possibly have done with him. This is actually a sentiment that he'd carry going forward. Abby declared that Crackhead Bob and Fred's girlfriend Mary were conspiring against him in some kind of backwards op. Mary allegedly wanted the video of Elephant Boy getting resized, but then she was going to pass it along to Crackhead Bob, who would then spread the video around, because that seems totally plausible, I guess. Now, respectfully, how could this even happen? Crackhead Bob could barely talk. They really think he could put together the words necessary to defame someone? Abby's story, consistently and unsurprisingly, did not add up. Fred's fluctuating opinion as to whether or not he wanted to stay on the show was clearly something that he struggled with, but he promised that if he left he wouldn't go to any other talk radio show, still remaining loyal to the people who helped him get to where he was then. Howard believed that even if Fred left, he'd come crawling back on his hands and knees because his history with the show was going to follow him, and he'd never be able to get back to a normal life after being a world-famous celebrity and rock star, so he'd fall into the show's lap yet again, and Abby would be long, long gone. He proposed an open invitation to both Elephant Boy and Abby. He chose to ignore Fred's declaration of retirement so that way he'd have some time to think things over. In the meantime, he wanted Abby to assist Fred in getting payment for his work on the adult film. Once they had proof that Fred was going to get some kind of payment for his time, they could come back and Howard would promote their website like they had originally desired.
No. Here's what will happen with Fred the Elephant Boy. Something will come up in his life where he needs publicity.
Or money.
And he will contact us and be back. Now,
Abby will be gone.
Abby will be gone because as she hears Fred talking about that he's never appearing on the show anymore, Fred is no longer of use to him.
He's out of her
That's my feeling.
He needed me.
Whatever.
Fred and Abby did return to the studio together the following day on October 1st, 1999. Does anybody else find it remarkable they were able to sort out all of these tricky payment problems in just one day? It's almost like they could have had everything sorted out before, but what do I know? The contract they provided left a lot to be desired, which Howard was not very enthused about, considering they tried to include his participation without his consent. Fred was supposed to receive only 34% of the net income, instead of the gross, which isn't even remotely fair. Additionally, his contract was created by an internet lawyer in the year 1999. The World Wide Web hadn't really reached its creative peak yet, let alone even had time to blossom into the business haven that it is today. How could they possibly know they're getting a legitimate, enforceable contract if they were going through some rinky-dink service online? The argument that Abby and her manager were trying to make is that they could not give Elephant Boy money if Howard didn't shout out their website, which isn't even remotely fair considering Stern wasn't part of the production of the film. Elephant Boy had already done this work for them and let them insert things inside of him, so he was owed his fair due. All of this is because they initially intended for Stern to be a part of the film's creation, but of course, they didn't know how to do business. This all fell apart and now they had no choice but to swing their dick around in an attempt to get what they wanted. Never mind the fact that Fred was caught in the crossfire. In fact, Fred looked emotionally drained during this visit. I'm unfortunately convinced that he was suffering from a deep sadness. This guy already had problems, and now another fun part of his life was getting unnecessarily complicated. But at the end of the day, he didn't have to film a porno if he didn't want to. Everyone just spoke over Elephant Boy, not allowing him to say what was actually on his mind. I get it, these guys are part of a radio show and they gotta keep it engaging, but they were battling over the well-being of Fred and he didn't even get a say in the matter. If they cared as much as they claimed, why didn't he get the chance to explain himself? Even if he was hard to understand, that'd still be funny for radio. He deserved to speak his piece. When he finally got the chance to speak his mind, he explained that he was concerned about the damage it would do to him, as the embarrassment could be pretty bad. He genuinely was worried about it becoming public, but I suppose it was too late to be concerned about that. Keep in mind, he still had not received a dime for this video, and thousands upon thousands of listeners were tuned in to hear about how he was getting scammed by crooks in the porno industry. Rule of thumb, never do business with people who profit from pleasure. You know the kind. The big takeaway from this entire debacle was that Fred was a very impressionable guy. Despite being a grown man, he didn't understand the gravity of the business deal that he had gotten himself into. The people that claimed they wanted to help him make money via inserting things into his brown eye pulled the wool over his eyes, made him look and feel like a fool, all while he had a vibrating toy jammed about knee-high in his butthole. Simply put, he didn't know enough about the business and got literally fucked.
Yeah. Elephant Boy, do you have a problem with this contract based on what I just said?
I know next to enough about business. I have the business or the liquor my as you. It may look good on my paper, but when I did, there was video camera. I thought it was for their own personal pleasure. I did not.
He was also persuaded to participate in the movie because he desperately wanted sex and was under the impression that the session was being recorded for the viewing pleasure of Abby and possibly her husband. The guy just wanted to get his rocks off. He didn't care about getting recorded for a private thing, but this changed everything. Abby continually refuted this, claiming that the video was always for the show, so we're presented with two possible narratives here. Either Elephant Boy was a willing participant in an adult film and was trying to mend his emotional wounds by denying the purpose behind his involvement, or Abby and her husband manipulated Elephant Boy into receiving a vibrator in his rectum while they intended to use this recorded footage for a forthcoming business venture, a video that would be shoehorned into an episode or two of The Howard Stern Show. Neither outcome really comes off as ideal. Maybe Fred should have been just happy to pull on his putt a little bit and call it a day. Doc, Abby's husband, employer, and the mastermind behind this game of deception, called into the show to argue his side of the story. His plan of attack was to yell over the phone and not allow anybody to talk, avoiding any and all questions regarding who was representing Elephant Boy during the creation of the contract. Isn't it interesting how these people got so bent out of shape when they got caught trying to sexually exploit a disabled man? The sad part is, before this contract was even conjured into existence, Elephant Boy had already signed a release months prior, essentially signing away his rights. The subsequent contract was more or less an amendment to it, that guaranteed him some rights versus none at all. Either way, Fred got royally screwed in the hiney. I sure hope he cut those people off after that shit show.
Hi, Doc. How are you?
Oh, I'm just fine, my man. And it's time we straighten a few things out here.
Go ahead.
First of all, you didn't ask for a guaranteed contract. What you asked for was a contract guaranteeing him a portion of the income that was brought in from it. And if I'm wrong, then what I'd like
Doc,
you to do, if you're not going to let me talk, then I will just go ahead and let it go.
After this, of course, Elephant Boy just couldn't stay away, regardless of the tension the show brought to his personal life. But let's be fair, he could have just said no. He created most of his problems, and that's pretty common, so I'd say that's okay. He returned to the studio on October 21st, 1999, just 20 days after his last appearance. Instead of being accompanied by a woman who was going to sodomize him for her own financial gain, he instead was with professional wrestler Mick Foley. When Fred entered the green room and finished shaking Mick's hand, Mick asked him how he was doing, to which Elephant Boy replied that he wasn't doing well. He didn't want to say anything too loud in public, especially with the cameras pointed directly at him. Gotta say, if he wasn't wanting to talk, he was definitely in the wrong building. Before Mick and Fred entered the studio, Gary stepped in front of the mic to tell Howard who he was frustrated with. To nobody's surprise, after everything that had recently happened, he had some beef with Elephant Boy. He alleged that Fred had been acting a little off since his adult film debacle, and others were starting to take notice. Gary thought it'd be good radio for Mick and Fred to be in separate rooms before coming in so they could be reunited on the air. Apparently the two were old friends, but Fred was not happy with Gary's arrangement. He actually attempted to leave the building twice because he wasn't happy about how he was being treated, but Gary claimed everything was normal and they were trying to be accommodating while running a live show. Elephant Boy entered the studio first because Howard wanted to get to the bottom of whatever the hell was actually going on. Fred claimed that he was upset about not being able to interact with Mick without all the cameras and questions, which I don't understand because he knew damn well what show he was participating in. Robin spoke up, saying that the show wasn't for creating personal time between Mick and Fred because they had things they were trying to get to. I mean, it is a business after all. Fred didn't respond well to this, as he apologized for how he was and tried to say that the show had done everything they could with him. Stern and the rest of his staff did not share this opinion, so either someone was pissing in Fred's ear or he no longer wanted to be on the show.
We're not here to create your personal time with mankind.
Okay,
we're doing a show.
Maybe you should not defraud me. I'm sorry to waste your time. No, people who know me, I talk about this for some time now. You did everything you can with me. What's new?
Know that? Fred, there's more to it than that.
It's okay if he didn't want to be on the show. That's his choice, but nobody there wanted him to go away because not only was he great fodder for the radio, they genuinely enjoyed his company. Supposedly, anyway. On the bright side, despite everything going on, those porno fiends were no longer in Fred's life. Things were finally starting to look up in a way, at the very least. With this in mind, Fred explained that there had been some good times on the show for him, and there had also been bad times, but they mostly evened out. At this point, it seemed that he either wanted to take his leave from the show for personal reasons, or he was unsure about the people around him. The repeated abuse from the people that he did business with had seemingly scarred him emotionally, making it difficult for him to sit in on the show and have a coherent conversation. He essentially wanted special rules to be enforced in order for him to even consider participating in any on-air hijinks. Mick was granted access into the studio once they had attempted to get to the bottom of whatever the hell was going on with Elephant Boy. Fred looked kinda smitten by Mick when he walked in, but hey, he liked what he liked. Howard inquired about the time that Mick had Fred over for a wedding back in 1990. Gotta admit, the two didn't really seem like the type of people that'd actually be friends, but I suppose weirder things have happened. Howard then explained how they found it intriguing that Fred was so attached to Mick, postulating that it may have been because of Fred's sexuality, as he was such a big fan of Mick and even tried to hang out with him in the locker room after one of his shows. That is not inherently gay, but then again, that was the locker room. Surely there had to be better places to hang out with him that didn't involve a lot of naked men present. Fred refuted this to the best of his ability. However, Mick knew better. He called him out in a lighthearted way. Poor Elephant Boy just couldn't catch a break. Ultimately, this interview was far more focused on Mick and his professional career and not about Fred's antics. Oh well, onward and upward, I guess.
And, you know, he used to hang around when Mankind was Cactus Jack.
He used to go into the locker room.
Yeah, and he used to watch Cactus Jack undress and stuff.
He used to pass me notes in the dressing room.
Right.
No,
and
but not those scarf notes.
But Elephant Boy would be in the dressing room with all the wrestlers watching him change.
But Mick, if I ever acted inappropriate in in a public with you and the other guy.
Fred, you are known throughout the wrestling industry as a little bit of a pecker checker.
Is that right?
No way, man. No way.
You never stare.
Seem that you maybe.
Yeah, right.
Fred would once again return to the studio some years later on May 27th, 2005. Granted, Fred appeared several times between the last appearance and this one, but it's really hard to find archives of The Stern Show without digging through dubious Discord servers or paying into a private messaging group that shares clips under secrecy. Either way, this appearance was significant because Elephant Boy brought along Mary for the visit, having been many, many years since she was last with him on the show. Over the years since the last visit we talked about, Fred had teamed up with Sal and Richard, two sexually questionable members of Stern's staff, and made plenty of crank phone calls for the show. He had participated in several game events like Hollyweird Squares, which was just a parody of Hollywood Squares that involved Wack Packers porn stars, members of the Westboro Baptist Church, and Daniel Carver, the former Grand Dragon of the KKK in Georgia. You know, come to think of it, the show really did have a bizarre cast of characters and guests. I can kinda see why it was so controversial back then. This was Elephant Boy's first in-person interview with Howard in many years, and he was hoping that he and his lovely woman would get treated with the respect that they deserve. Fred and Mary had been going through a rough patch in their relationship, breaking up and getting back together a few times, as they hoped they could give it yet another try. It did appear that the two really did love each other, but Fred's life was quite the turbulent one, and that was surely not easy to deal with, especially when the more intimate parts of his personal life were shared on the air. The interview started off with Howard asking Mary as to why she and Elephant Boy had previously broken up. Mary said it was for two distinct reasons. The long distance was a problem, leaving them to resort to dirty talk on the phone to get off. Imagine Elephant Boy describing what he wants to do over the phone while he's whipping his willy. I'm pretty thankful we never had to hear that. But not just this. His bisexuality was still lingering inside, making him desire more than she could offer. Turns out, he was sleeping with dudes on the side, and even did a guy in front of her when he was visiting in Cleveland. Not to mention the guy shaved him in the shower. I'm not judging, but Jesus, what a thing to know. The video of Fred getting poked was also a major point of contention. His interest in sleeping with men was not something that she was acclimated for, especially when coupled with the stress she got from working at the post office. I'm not even joking, she mentions her post office stress as being a contributing factor to her troubles with romance. I mean, I get it, when I worked as a mailman, it was really hard to maintain an erection. Regardless of everything, at least they were back on. Fred had been consistently calling Mary despite their relationship having fizzled out, determined to keep tabs on her because he cared. She missed him and what they had, and Fred capitalized on that like a stud. All it really took was cutting the gay stuff out of his life, or at least keeping it to a clandestine minimum. He claimed he stopped boning dudes a few months prior to this, and of course this was still happening when he was trying to get back with her. There's nothing quite like some male-on-male butt love when you're trying to rekindle your relationship with the woman of your dreams. Mary was understandably not happy about this revelation, because he just never bothered to let her know that he was still fighting his inner battle. He struggled to defend himself when everyone started asking him to be honest about what he was up to. His only course of action was to panic and trip over his words. You know, the usual. The very thing he's known best for. The news that Elephant Boy was still bumping uglies with other guys rubbed her the wrong way, which slowed down the repairing of their relationship, but this gave them plenty to go over during their pillow talk after the show.
Right. I have this finish. It's not being satisfied by a woman. I went to the next, the next
best thing would be a fat broad.
Some months after Fred's last visit with Mary, he showed up to an appearance Gary Delabate was holding at a car dealership. Unfortunately for Baba Booey, this appearance had a staggeringly low attendance rate, with only two standout attendees being Wack Packers, Fred the Elephant Boy and High Pitch Eric. What a pair. High Pitch was like everywhere, man. He was certainly out and about a little too much for someone who was seemingly immobile and unable to do a day's work. Sometime after this event, on September 12, 2005, Gary remarked that there was a pungent smell that lingered through the appearance that he couldn't exactly place. When he posed a question regarding it, his crew told him to stay hush-hush about it. Turns out the general consensus was that Fred might have soiled his pants while he was there. It was visible through his trousers and even ran down his legs, staining his socks. Some even alleged that he tried to wipe the feces off with a nearby tarp. The stink dissipated once Fred left the shindig, confirming that he was the source of the elephant funk.
No, yeah. Robert, it was like I really thought that we were next to some sort of a sewer.
Right.
And I was like, can't we move? And the girl from the street team kept like giving me the shush sign, like I shouldn't say something. Uh-huh. And then I called over to the side, and it turned out, it was Elephant Boy, but it was like a sewer. And according to them, they took pictures of it. By the way, they can give it to me first thing this morning. They think that Elephant Boy soiled himself.
Get out of here!
There was a big stain. And then they said that like it was on his leg and that it was on his sock and his leg, and at one point
poopy, right?
Poopy. He was rubbing it on a tarp like to get it off, but it was It was unbelievable, Robin. It would knock you over.
Fred called in to give his side to these shocking allegations. As it would turn out, he was fully aware that he had crapped his pants prior to showing up to the event, but he merely hoped that nobody would notice. He alleged that the fecal leakage caught him by surprise. He was not intentionally trying to pinch a loaf in his pants prior to showing up to the event, but he was really hoping that nobody would notice the shit running down his leg and making a pool on the floor.
I want you to be real honest, okay?
Yeah.
All right. So Gary said at the appearance he noticed that you'd had an accident in your pants.
Yeah, I did on with it was something with no notice.
What?
You were hoping no one would notice?
No, it just happened.
This unfortunately happened while he was riding a train when he was on his way there, which means that other passengers were likely subjected to the foul odor emanating from his ass. He figured that maybe he could just endure the unpleasant sensation and still try to be a good friend to the show by sticking around during the event. He was able to make it about 30 minutes before throwing in the brown-stained towel. I think the more considerate move for him would have been just to clean himself up before arriving, but I don't know. I guess his way did sort of work in the end. It isn't like he had to be there, it was just a normal public appearance at a car dealership no less. It's not some kind of important red carpet event, but even if it was like that, would he have shown up to an event like that with a log in his undies? The stain was so visible that Gary's crew were able to photograph it while he was there. Thankfully, I was unable to find any evidence of this photo ever being shared with the public, but odds are it wasn't reliably archived. Fred argued that he did attempt to step into a supermarket to clean up the spillage, but it just wasn't enough, as the bit that ran down his leg went unnoticed by him until he made it to the event. He also did his best to make it clear that this was the only time this happened, but I do have my doubts concerning that. Despite feeling as though his tenure on the show had run its course, Fred continued to show up whenever Stern or his cronies felt he was due to appear. This led to Fred eventually forming strong, lifelong bonds with the show's staff and of course other members of the Wack Pack. Fred had a hot and cold relationship with High Pitch Eric, a fellow mush-mouthed Wack Packer who was afflicted by a funny-sounding voice. Sometimes they'd bump heads, throwing harsh words in a vitriolic exchange over the phone. There's nothing quite like listening to two people argue when they're both difficult to understand. I think this merely serves to prove that beauty exists in many forms in our strange little mysterious world.
You quit the show? Maybe you should quit eating so much, you slop.
No, maybe you should stop being a fucking asshole.
That's a bad comeback. You suck.
Yeah, well, you suck too. You suck shit.
Your career is over. I will make a better high pitch. What? Quack, 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 quack. I'm a big fat mess.
Yeah, well, you are a big fat mess. You should clean your shirts more often. Your shirts are like a tablecloth, you fucking dirty, messy bitch.
Who's hobbies? This is a big, fat, smelly where?
No, Elephant Boy, you're a fucking piece of shit.
I'm Elephant Boy. You're just an elephant.
You're a motherfucker. You're a piece of shit.
I am the new hobbyist Eric. And you can be big, fat, shit, smelly Eric.
This conversation is done. I've had it with you.
At least I am not scared of fish, you pussy.
And who could forget the time that Elephant Boy had to paint High Pitch's package? Elephant Boy was in the studio to play a round of Wheel of Sex with High Pitch Eric. He was only doing this to get his hands on an Xbox for Mary's children that Christmas. I guess he felt it was necessary to do peculiar things for cheap thrills and quick cash rather than keeping his dignity in line by earning money through a normal job. He was instructed to spin the wheel, which had a chance to land on some particularly nutty outcomes, including but not limited to shaving his own head, getting teabagged by High Pitch Eric, playing naked leapfrog with High Pitch, painting High Pitch's junk with green paint using only his hand, peeing in a diaper. Out of all of the possible outcomes that Fred could have landed on, of course he landed on the one that requires him to change the color of High Pitch's sack with his paint-covered hands. Like I said in my High Pitch Eric video, outcomes like this are why I'm not much of a gambling man. High Pitch removed his pants with ease, revealing his uncircumcised wang to Fred and the rest of the show's staff. Fred covered his fingers with the thick green paint, carefully lathering up High Pitch's testicles. I guess at least this wasn't Elephant Boy's first rodeo, so he likely had a good idea as to what he was doing. By the end of this, Fred received the Xbox and was now adamant that he wanted to help High Pitch in some way, but nothing ever came from this. I'd imagine that he wanted his balls painted too. I mean, I guess it's only fair, but I also don't need the mental image of High Pitch Eric and Fred the Elephant Boy smearing paint on each other's balls. But as time went on, the two would often get into beef over the phone or Twitter, shit-talking each other and sending threats. This became a recurring problem for the both of them, but I feel like they needed each other. Sometimes the human brain becomes reliant on the thrill of being an annoying turd. Another Wack Packer that Fred had a close relationship with was Crack crackhead Bob. Now granted, their interactions ran similarly hot and cold like Fred and High Pitch, but they generally got along better. Fred tried helping Bob get girls, Bob kind of filled Fred's role with some of their appearances, which led to Fred getting some more time away from the show, that sort of thing. Their interactions, while sometimes unusual, were usually mutually beneficial. Despite their quarrels, crackhead Bob and Fred the Elephant Boy were tremendous friends to the end, mostly because they were both difficult to understand at times and were both members of the same group. I mean, they were already paired together because of the Wack Pack, so why not bond a bit? For example, on August 15, 1996, Fred and Bob teamed up to perform a series of duets for a cassette tape that could be purchased by Stern Show fans. One of their big singles was a cover of Mockingbird by Carly Simon and James Taylor. Give it a listen. I'm sure it'll speak to you on an emotional level.
Mock, thin, ing, thin, thin, yeah, Mockingbird. Everybody at your heart is gonna find me a mockingbird. And if the mockingbird goes sing, he got to find me a diamond ring. And if the diamond ring.
Next up was I Got You Babe by Sonny and Cher.
They say we're young and we don't know. Won't find out until we're grown. I got you and you got me, and I got you and you got I babe. I got you, babe. I got you, babe.
I'm normally not one for duets, but something about these two really scratches the itch for me. I only wish they could have made several complete albums together. I definitely own multiple copies of their entire discography. But what better way to bond with the Wack Pack than to spend the holiday together, especially one like Thanksgiving that is all about spending time with friends and family, enjoying a hearty meal of turkey and mashed potatoes, and being thankful for the many wonderful things that are in one's life. I think there's really no better method for it. On November 23, 2006, Fred the Elephant Boy went to Marianne from Brooklyn's house for Thanksgiving, bringing along a dessert for the occasion. Marianne from Brooklyn is a longtime fan of Howard Stern and is known for her harsh, raspy voice. This was a star-studded event featuring Wack Packers from all walks of life, such as High Pitch Eric, Siobhan, who had recently received bottom surgery for their transition, Eddie the Produce Guy, a man known for having a dark complexion on just his junk, crackhead Bob, and of course Fred the Elephant Boy. Elephant Boy was extremely appreciative to be around people that he knew from the show instead of spending the day with his actual family. Everybody knows the worst part of Thanksgiving is listening to the inevitable familial political discourse that accompanies the carving of the bird. What I wouldn't give to sit at the table and watch Fred eat a bunch of juicy turkey, babbling on with a mouthful of avian. The sweet treat that Fred brought with him was a chocolate cake, with letters scribbled on top with icing that read, "A Wack Pack Thanksgiving." The misprint was obviously due to a miscommunication error between Fred and the person at the grocery store who wrote on the cake for him. But they probably could have deduced that he was trying to say Thanksgiving rather than Thanksgiving, but you know. He claimed that when he wrote down what he wanted, the S in Thanksgiving was too small to notice. I really don't know what to believe, but I'm leaning more towards him using that as an excuse for the typo, as he may have been embarrassed that his speech impediment got in the way of him getting the exact cake that he desired. It tasted the same regardless, so nothing of value was lost. Before it was time to chow down on the festive dinner that Marianne had prepared for everybody, the guys and Siobhan were having a discussion on the most important topic you can get into before eating: sex. Eddie the Produce Guy wanted to know if Fred would put his mouth on Siobhan's body, to which Fred seemed mostly indifferent to. He wasn't against it, but he also wasn't jumping out of his seat either. When it was time to finally commence the consumption of dead animals and plants, Marianne requested that Elephant Boy say grace for everyone, despite varying religious backgrounds. Fred gave it his best shot, all things considered.
Fred, can you please say grace for us?
I'm Jewish. I can say grace.
Say Jewish grace.
Okay. Okay. And it means bless all of you for good friends, for good year, and happy love to all of you.
Shortly after, everybody began sharing what they were thankful for. Fred mentioned that he was especially thankful for Howard Stern because if it were not for the work that he did, none of the people present would have ever crossed paths, and therefore the lovely dinner they were sharing would have never come to fruition. He was also thankful that everybody was in the position that they were in, savoring the tender moment he was experiencing with the others at the table. By the time the dinner had come to a close and everybody's bellies were sufficiently stuffed, people began to depart, returning to their respective hovels. Fred thanked Marianne for hosting the get-together, stating that he really enjoyed himself. The most important thing is that he did not shit himself during this, at least as far as I know, so this was quite a nice little shindig. Fred would continue to make more appearances as the years went on. If I covered his every involvement with the show, I'd be here for another hour or two at least. Unfortunately, as it always goes, this story does have an end. In late 2022, shortly after a Thanksgiving celebration, Elephant Boy was admitted to a hospital due to feeling weak. He had been battling undisclosed health issues for a while, even requiring the use of an electric wheelchair from time to time. He was put on life support, and soon after, he passed away due to complications with blood clots. He died at the age of 64, accompanied by his family. Stern waited until an hour into the show, about 30 days after Fred's passing, to finally bring up that Fred had died. He declared that Fred was one of his favorite members of the legendary Wack Pack, and reminisced about how he came into contact with the show and the immense legacy he left behind.
We just lost it right at the end of 2022, and I want to do a little obituary for my man. It was Elephant Boy died. The very famous Fred the Elephant Boy. He was the longest-serving Wack Packer in show history. His real name was Fred Schreiber, and we gave him the nickname Elephant Boy because he sounded like the movie, The Elephant Man. He was a good-hearted guy, and always, whenever you asked him to do something, he was so thrilled to be a part of the radio show, and he gave us lots of hours of enjoyment. So Fred the Elephant Boy, rest in peace. We lost you in 2022.
Fred's impact on the community is easily one of the most significant in Stern show history. Essentially being the godfather of the Wack Pack, Elephant Boy has left his mark on millions of listeners, touched the lives of many with his stories of sexual exploration and uncontrolled defecation, and warmed the heart of every person who had the privilege of listening to him speak. Many people left their thoughts online, speaking about the many things Fred did, missing their dear friend. Wack Packers also spoke about their fondest memories of him to make sure that he would not fade away so easily. In the series of stories and sagas that have been deeply interwoven in the ongoing events of The Howard Stern Show, the Wack Pack is easily the most fascinating. Fred the Elephant Boy, Beetlejuice, High Pitch Eric, Crackhead Bob, Eric the Midget, and all of the others have helped craft an incredibly hilarious and heartwarming interconnected tale that spans decades. Sure, a lot of it was perverse and crass, but that just added to the quality. Fred will always be deeply missed, as now the radio waves are a little too easy to understand. But that being said, that's going to be it for today's video. If you like what I do, leave a comment, rate, and subscribe. If you want to support me in a more personal way, you can check out the Patreon link and the Teespring link in the description. I've got more content coming down the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you degenerates next time.